Hello, I'm Linda Seith from The Layered Onion. Thank you for joining us. We will be listening to our amazing creators talk about their art and mental health. 48 million artists all over the world share this lived experience. The Layered Onion was formed to create a supportive community, allowing the creators to focus on their art, bringing their work from the shadows to receive the recognition and opportunities they deserve. Each podcast will feature an artist who talks about their work and mental wellness. Art is healing. We hope these discussions will inspire you to appreciate the stories behind the creations and, more importantly, inspire your inner creator. Together, we can tackle the stigma around mental health.
Could we just walk?
I am Harper Hazelmare, and my pronouns are she and they. I live in Madison, Wisconsin on occupied Ho-Chunk land, and I am a writer and a visual artist and a storyteller and a medicine maker.
So, okay, I'm going to stop right there. Tell me about medicine maker.
Excuse me. So I keep a community apothecary, and I have been making plant medicine for quite a while now, and started when I was a teenager and was taught by elders in my family, and we worked with plant and animal medicine, and I worked in Western medicine for a while, and now I've gone on to the old ways, and it's much better for, in certain ways, it's much better for not working 30-hour shifts and dealing with all the insurance and things like that. It's nice to work with people, teach people about the earth and plants and animal magic, and do a different kind of healing that is also self-supportive for the medicine maker.
Well, interesting. I think we may get back to that.
Okay.
So perhaps you can tell me what drew you to, being a creative person. Obviously, you said you write. I know you are working on a book. You do visual art, and frankly, it sounds like so herbal medicine is also very creative. So what drew you to be a creative soul?
It just always has been. That's the way that it's always been. When I was very, very young, I was writing and performing plays. I was dancing. It was like air. It just is. Always has been.
So something that you have always been drawn to.
It's just a part of me. It's not even going to something. It just is.
So in the very first issue of the Shallot, which was on Reflections of Self, you had a poem, and it was called The Uncomfortable Thought. Can you describe how this poem came about?
It was a reflection on how we all have uncomfortable thoughts and feelings, and it was a way to express being with those when they happen, and not kicking them out, not calling them names, but just being able to be with them and to welcome them for however long it was that they were going to stick around. And that's a difficult practice, and yet a really important one. It's one that is, I feel, pretty prevalent in mental health, where we need to make space for things that really get moralized as good or bad. And we can sit with ourselves, and that means all of ourselves. It's not like when you have a headache, you think your head is terrible and it's evil and you call it names. It's just your head.
Well, I found it to be a really lovely piece.
Thank you.
So I'm wondering, do you happen to have it so that you could read it?
Sure. My friend, the uncomfortable thought, visits, taking up residence in my attic brain. I do my best to listen, to ask questions, and listen again. Some thoughts only want to be loud, make messes, eat the last of the biscuits, and overstay their welcome. The uncomfortable thought stays for the time that is needed, showing me postcards of their travels as we tidy up together and remake the bed. They are a good companion in occasional times, playing marbles and dolls, showing me how things might be. It's good to make friends with all of them regardless, to invite them to tea and swing in the schoolyard.
What I really love about this poem is how so often with an uncomfortable thought we want to bury it, push it away. And the visual that I'm left with is this idea that if I would just welcome it and see it for what it is, perhaps it wouldn't be so uncomfortable. Is maybe you can, everybody hears poems differently, but maybe you can talk about, is that sort of some of what you were thinking?
Yeah, I was. You got to make friends with it. You got to make friends with it. And every time, like in DBT training, dialectical behavioral training, they talk about how distraction can be good sometimes and useful. And other times, there's also the science that distracting too much will actually make things worse. And being able to say, hey, come on in, you're here, it's okay. And in that attic brain, just even if it's sitting in the doorway together and just being like, well, we're here, what can we do about that? I think is pretty important. It's a form of radical self-care. It's a form of radical self-love. It's just very, very valuable.
I also find it really interesting how there's even the implication that the thought or memory may not be exactly what the memory is. Am I kind of hearing that correctly?
Memories and emotions, they are true, and yet they can be untrue at the same time. They are valid and therefore truthful, and sometimes they don't really tell you the whole truth. Like we can remember things at maybe 8 years old that we remember quite differently at 25, 55. And because we know memories become more complex as we age. And so we also have an understanding of what was going on more at the time. We can fill in the blanks rather than it being so singular of a time.
So I was recently having a conversation with one of my siblings, and we have very different memories of the same event.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what you're talking about, that your own perceptions and other things surround that memory and it evolves.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like the game of telephone, right? Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I just find that was a really important line in the poem, at least for me. It certainly was. So when did you start writing poetry?
When I was a very small child, that was first love. First love.
So So when readers read your poetry or see your art, what is the most important desires or hopes that you leave with the viewer or the reader?
Tenderness. Even the things that are much more visceral, there's a tenderness to them. And also use of color. Sometimes you have to really look for it. But that's also in words too. There's colorful language, right? We have that euphemism, but there's shading in words, just like shading in a painting or drawing.
So you recently did an onion print, or actually there was an original first, but an onion for World Mental Health Day, where we did a call out to the layered onion of anybody who wanted to do an onion drawing. And I just was mesmerized by the fact that you had used and developed the paint or watercolor from onion skins.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me a little bit about how did you do that?
Yeah, there's I work with a lot of natural dyes, botanical dyes, because that's also part of the business design for me, is to continue working with plants in new ways, and making botanical dyes is working with natural products is part of that. And I'll often use tea, coffee, elderberry, marigold. Those are my favorites. And so I was wondering what would happen if I used onion skin, because I've used onion skin for dyeing fabric before. Um, excuse me. And I was curious to see if it would be like watercolor, if it would be its completely own separate thing. Would it be near tea? Would it be near coffee? And it was its own beautiful little creation. And I wanted, because incorporating onion somehow, I'm like, well, this is kind of my deal. And so I wanted to try that out, and it worked.
So did you make different versions on different layers of the skin, or are all the variation actually within the dye?
All the variations of the skin are within the dye.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
It was fun. It was fun. And it made the house smell good too. So there's that.
Did it make your eyes cry water?
No, it was just the skin boiling up. Mm-mm.
So no, I wondered if it was many different versions, so it was all one. It's so there's so much variety and depth in it. So wow, that's exciting.
Yeah, the process of it was going over it in parts with the dye again, like letting part dry, going over it again. So that's where the layers came in.
Wow, it's lovely, and certainly folks can see the painting I'm talking about on thelayeredonion.com. It's a lovely print. So earlier we kind of talked in your poem about the uncomfortable thought of really using comfort and getting comfortable with the uncomfortable thought, or going back to, I'll call it a comfort book or a comfort movie or something that just gets you to a place where you can, because you know what's going to happen, you can relax, or you sort of feel like you're with friends. Do you have a go-to comfort book or show or movie that you like?
My comfort book that I read about once a year, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less, is Hagakure, the 11 books of Hagakure. It's little essays for samurai wisdom. And it's just been a touchstone for ages. I know that similarly, folks will read like The Alchemist or The Four Agreements, and it's kind of along those lines. But yeah, Hagakure.
How do you spell that?
Hagakure.
Okay, I wanted to know because I'm going to look that up, and I probably wouldn't have spelled it correctly.
That's all right.
And there's 11 books of this?
It's compiled into one now. So, yeah, just looking up Hagakure, you'll get it. But there's also Bushido, which is more expansive essays on the samurai way of life.
Interesting. I've loved asking folks because everybody's are so different, and they're great ideas for me to learn and look at. I tend to go toward fantasy because then it's so different than the experience that I'm having. And that didn't happen until I was an adult. When I was young, I never read fantasy. So I find it fascinating that the more I live life, the more I'm drawn to fantasy for comfort.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. So the Layered Onion is a community of artists with mental and emotional health challenges. And what have you found valuable about being a part of this community?
Exactly that, community. It's been very wonderful to be connected with other artists, other creators, and to support each other, when we're having shows, when it's somebody's not having a great week, when someone has a book coming out, all sorts of things. And to connect with people who have all different kinds of styles has been really fun, really inspirational.
So I know you have a book, or you're in the process of publishing the book. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about the book.
Yeah, sure. So I've been writing a book on DID, dissociative identity disorder, for the past year. And it is about my experiences living with DID, but also for partners of people living with DID, because my partner, when we were doing research, he couldn't find a book that was for partners, and it was very frustrating and very alienating. And so we decided, well, then we have the responsibility to create something to fill that void. And so that's what we've been doing for the past year.
So what's been the most rewarding part of working on this book?
Oh, hoping that it helps at least one other person. It's been good to remember. Good to remember people who have been very important and aren't around much anymore. And by that, I mean alters as we integrate and then split again, and a whole different cast of people shows up.
So what's been the most challenging part of working on the book?
The writing itself. I mean, come on, the writing itself, the workshopping of things, where it's like this is the idea of it, but how do I get it on paper? Yeah, and just getting it done. Just getting it done.
Yeah, it's being a writer myself, it's very easy to find something else to do when you're maybe at a crossroads in what you're writing?
Or you're 30,000 words in and you're like, is this ever going to get done? You know, because you're only like a third of the way in and you're like, is this ever going to get done? Because
Yes.
it feels so futile at that point. Like you keep marching on and doing your pages and it just feels like it's never going to get done, even though you keep working on it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I know, and if folks read the first Shallot, your poem was listed as Helen Hazelmare, and now your name is Harper Hazelmare.
Mm-hmm.
Can you maybe talk a little bit about the name change?
Yeah, I wanted to have a name that was more in line with my gender identity. I wanted a gender affirming name, and I identify as non binary and have been mulling over a name and if I wanted to change my name at all, for quite some time, as all names should be pondered because names are power. And then this name just showed up one day, and I'm like, oh, well, there it is. Okay, that's what we're doing.
So maybe the name had to find you, huh?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I was ready for it. It just had to find me.
Well, very cool.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you have any last words of wisdom you want to share with other artists that face similar challenges?
Finding communities that help, finding communities who are really for you, finding communities of other creative people. Like they're doing workshops with other people, doing accountability groups with people. That's one of the things in the Layered Onion is I run a weekly accountability group that's super fun. And also ways to hopefully hand over the parts that are just really so very, very daunting so you can just create. And that's one of the ways that the Layered Onion really helps is you give us submissions to work towards. You hang shows for us. I mean, that's amazing. You framed shows for us. I mean, wow. And so being able to take those types of things off creative people's plate is really, really of great benefit. And I would encourage anybody who is creative to find their other creatives within their community. There's a fantastic group that I know and work with in person who once a month we just have basically a creative retreat on a Sunday for a full day. Doing things like that, doing things like your own personal creative retreats with maybe studio visits where people can walk in and visit you, see what's going on. And that's also fun from what's perhaps a very solitary practice to accountability, because if they're in your studio, you probably need to be working.
So, one of the things that you said that really struck me is when talking about the idea of community and that creation often is so solitary. And I think most creators, I'm not going to say all, but it seems as though most are more introverts. Do you have any recommendations of how you get the courage to sort of put yourself out there?
Well, being an extrovert, I don't know that I can speak to introversion, but it being a solitary process I can speak to, and no, it regardless of extrovert, introvert, it takes a tremendous amount of courage to put yourself out there. And having a group of trusted friends, or just trusted people, like how writers will have trusted readers. And then there can be people who will give honest feedback, and honest and loving feedback, and also people who will give very, very candid feedback, but you know that you can take it in with the best of intentions. You understand that. So a small group of that. There's one person that I'm working with right now who is starting short stories, and they feel very shy about it, and understandably so. And they are cultivating right now their trusted readers, and they want to make sure that they have more to show. And it's like, well, sure, but it's always a good time to start. It's just to be like, well, what do you think of this opener? I was thinking about going here with it. Or there's this painting, it's missing something. What do you see? Or should I stop now? It's always great to have feedback. It's always useful to have feedback. And then there's also discerning what you keep for yourself. Because sometimes we write things, we draw things, we paint things, we sculpt things that are just for us. And we have every right to just keep them just for us. And that's sometimes difficult to figure out what piece is what.
That was a wonderful thought. Because I do think you're right. Sometimes maybe they're just meant for us.
The first manuscript I wrote was just for me. And that was a lot of time and a lot of words to be just for me, but it really was. And I learned so much from that. I learned so much from, one, writing a manuscript, but two, for keeping it for myself and understanding that it was just for me.
So words of wisdom. So thank you.
Yeah.
Well,
sure.
Well, thank you, Harper. I really appreciate you joining us. And I would encourage anyone to read The Shallot. And Harper has a piece in the most recent issue. And this time it's photography, correct?
It is, yes.
So very exciting. And it also has a lot of complexity. So I would really encourage people to check that out. Just for when your book is out.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Take care.
All right. You too.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us today. It is an honor to talk with these amazing artists. You can see and read the artist's work in The Shallot, our journal of mental health, art, and literature, or on our website, thelayeredonion.com. Thank you.